In verse 1, he cries out, "O Lord, hear my prayer. Come to my relief." In verse 2, it says, "Do not bring your servant into judgment." In verse 7, it says, "Answer me quickly, Lord. My spirit fails. Do not hide your face from me." Verse 9 says, "Rescue me from my enemies." Verse 11 says, "Bring me out of my trouble." And what David is essentially saying, where are you, God? Where are you? Haven't we been there? When everything piles on top of us, where are you, God, in the midst of my distress? I'm overwhelmed. I'm surrounded by darkness. I'm crushed to the ground. With the enemy standing on my head, where are you, God? We all face moments of silence, discouragement, and despair. But just because we feel these things, just because our mind tells us something else, doesn't mean that God has left us. Doesn't the Word tells us where He promises us that He will never leave us nor forsake us, that He'll be with us every step of the way. In verse 1 he says, "Hear my prayer." He lifts his eyes heavenward. Instead of looking inward, he lifts his eyes heavenward. "In your faithfulness and in your righteousness, come to my relief." But it's only God that can bring the victory. It is only God in the midst of trouble that can bring transformation. And even though David had all these emotions, even though David was in the midst of darkness, yet he got the strength to pray out to the mighty God, because he knew that in God's faithfulness and in God's righteousness, that God could deliver him. In hard times, prayer is difficult. David, in an impossible situation, finding the strength just to pray to the one that can change his circumstance. In verses 5 forward, what we see from David is he stops looking inward to himself and he starts looking, and he started off in verse 1 with praying. He looked at himself, he confessed his weaknesses, he confessed his vulnerability before God and before man. But in verse 5 forward, he changes direction, he changes the focus of his mind, and he looks upward. And in verse 5 he says, "I remember the days of long ago. I meditate on all your works and consider what your hands have done." See, when David says them words, he's not thinking about, the peaceful memories that he had sitting in his father's field looking after the sheep, or playing the harp for Saul in the courts. He remembered the mighty works of God. Maybe he thought of creation. Maybe he thought of Moses and the parting of the Red Sea. Maybe he remembered that it was God that gave him the strength to defeat a lion and a bear and then Goliath. I'm sure David meditated on the faithfulness of God towards his people. Maybe he considered God's love. Maybe he considered God's mercy and power, his unwavering commitment to him. But by remembering, looking up and looking back, he remembered himself. And it seemed to be that David has an art in this way to encourage himself. Over in 1 Samuel chapter 30 and verse 6, it says that David was greatly disturbed, but he encouraged himself in the Lord. David was greatly disturbed, but he encouraged himself in the Lord. He looked back to the faithfulness of God. And maybe this morning, church, maybe you need to look back. Maybe you need to look back to Calvary's tree. Maybe you need to look back to the goodness of God. Maybe you need to look back to where God has placed his hand on you all over these years and encourage yourself in the Lord. Verse 8 is key to the passage. It says, "I have put my trust in you." See, when he stood with his hands out and he surrendered, it was basically saying, "Lord, I'm trusting you. I don't really understand what's going on. I don't understand why I'm feeling this way. I don't understand why all these emotions are on top of me. But in the midst of all, I'm trusting you."